to introduce the next speaker to you all already. Next up is David Margetts. He is CEO from Factorytalk. David is going to give a presentation on electronic batch record in the cloud. I have had the pleasure of working with David in the past. So we've met at our physical Pharma MES Asia events, and I'm very happy to see him again here today in our broadcast and the digital format. David, take it away.
Hello, and thank you, Sabrina, for that introduction. Can you hear me fine? Okay, very good. And hopefully you can see the presentation now as well. Is that being displayed, Sabrina?
Yes, it's being displayed just fine.
Okay, and also thank you for everybody to attend and to WeConnect for organizing this event. Obviously in this year, everybody is getting more familiar with the challenges and also the opportunities of working remotely and using web systems as part of our everyday life, and now also as part of our business and how we perform our work processes. My topic today, EBR in the cloud, I'm going to cover a little bit about what we're doing and our journey. And as Alan mentioned in the last discussion, then every company is on different levels and has, let's say, different levels of maturity and different needs to some extent. And what I want to talk about is what I think cloud EBR can be very relevant for companies, especially in pharma right now, looking to digitize, but wanting to do that in a modern way. So in terms of the problem statement, what I see is that we are far away from this 4.0 dream, and we're still struggling to get onto the first track of the maturity level that Industry 4.0 talks about. The vast majority of GXP regulated manufacturers are still on paper. This is tens of thousands of GXP facilities that are off the radar, if you will, of the incumbent EBR offerings today. This means outside of the global large multinational corporations, there's effectively no software used for critical manufacturing data and records. And I believe this is something that we should address, and we should actually look to speed up and find more opportunities and more solutions, not just for the lighthouses, but for, let's say, tier 2 sites and small to medium-sized companies in the pharma biotech industry. I think particularly in this year, it's becoming more clear how important that is. The global companies themselves have typically not managed to do this beyond their top tier sites. So my question is, are we overcomplicating EBR? You know, are we packaging it in a way as suppliers? Are we putting the functionality in a way together that can be delivered quicker and let's say with less efforts? And of course, we want to look at other technologies that we can use today that have changed in the last 10 to 5 years that can speed things up, including such as integration. Now there's a lot of existing technology out there, and this can be more standardized and more configurable. So as we digitize, as industries digitize, companies deserve these solutions. And in our industry, we believe that patients deserve better. What we're also seeing is that the traditional MES approach is, let's say, seeing threat from lean web native type offerings. So faster bottom-up approaches powered by IoT concepts and technology. So I'm sure many people are very familiar with the Industry 4 model, the maturity model here. And there's a lot of inspiration to be gained when we look at the, let's say, the more sophisticated, cool use cases, prediction, adaptation. Now, what we see across, especially when we look at the whole industry, not only the, let's say, global companies and tier 1 sites, is the reality is that we're still struggling to get onto that first step of that journey. Hopefully today, what we're going to talk about with Cloud EBR is somewhat of an inspiration of different ways and more agile methods that we can do to help companies get on the road to first being paperless and then connecting systems and then getting the most out of the data inside. Now you've got rid of, let's say, paper-based manual records. You can actually use the electronic systems with the power of today's analytics and technology. So we need to democratize Industry 4 solutions, if you will. What is interesting for me, if you look at the typical drivers for manufacturing IT, so quality, compliance assurance, cost and efficiency performance, these were obviously not enough to make a big enough change in the industry. Obviously not enough to package solutions to solve these problems for the wide industry as it stands, small and medium-sized companies as well. What we are seeing, the good news is that the capabilities, so new capabilities farther up the roadmap of Industry 4.0, they are attracting smaller companies to make investments and to look at digitization. So quality is one aspect we have to fulfill. And as Alan mentioned, data integrity, it's almost a no-brainer that to do this in an electronic record system has considerable benefits and control over procedural and manual approaches. Cost and efficiency to use the data to speed up, to analyze what you're doing, look at the cycle times, etc. Compare yields, have faster information for doing such a comparison and continuous improvement. And finally, the capability, that is where we're seeing more inspiration, but the tools have to be there, have to be accessible, and have to be available for the wider market. And this is one of the key parts of my presentation today. And very quickly, why have we been so slow to adopt new technology that can speed these important medicines to market and is more prevalent in other industries? So if we had time to do a Mentimeter kind of assessment today, and we asked the questions, what would it be? So what would our excuses be not to do manufacturing IT in the pharma business? So costs, the GMP, CSV expectations, the infrastructure, integration complexity, time and effort to implement. Or would it be all of the above? So I think finally, it depends a little bit on your perspective and your background. But what I see and what I would like to point out is that we should not blame the regulators. So the US FDA has been very strong and forward, let's say, looking in some of the guidances even from 15 years ago, quality by design. And we're still struggling to implement PAT, which is only the production process control part of that, if you will, in our industry. So we really have to take a look and say, as an industry, we should lead. As suppliers, we should lead this development and not wait for the regulators to really push us into where we should be going. I won't spend too long on this slide. I'm sure everybody in the audience is very familiar with the difference between legacy on-premise client-server approaches and new cloud subscription-based software models. If you just look to the cost components, for new companies looking to adopt digital technologies and software systems, having less components here is less complexity. It is easier to relate these 4 key areas for a GXP system on the cloud to the value and to the activity of what you have to do to deliver that, and the proportion of the subscription, which is the use of the application, against the efforts to set it up and maintain are much, of course, better balanced. And let's say, if you look at the typical projects or CapEx upfront costs against the operating cost difference, that is very significant, and even smaller companies are aware of the benefits of moving this to OpEx. So it could be up to 10 times a difference in a cost perspective when we compare a simple EBR, let's put it like that, on-premise to a cloud SaaS EBR. So we're missing the boat to Industry 4, Pharma 4.0, but we're not missing this iceberg of costs and effort. And today, and what we're focusing on really is SaaS. So cloud is a bit of a misnomer, if you will. It can create some confusion. So it is better generally to talk about infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. Now, we focus on SaaS because our customers don't want to manage anything other than their core business. They want to use the applications. They want to move towards new software. But let's say understanding, do they have the in-house capability in terms of infrastructure management, IT understanding? Some of our clients have a very, very small IT teams, and let's say they see this as a way to move forward and implement software systems without all of the baggage of building up a larger organization to support that. Platform as a service is also another approach. We also offer that, and let's say for those who are cloud reluctant, let's say, and I also, touching back on Alan's point, I very much agree that if you're using the large cloud service providers, it is very difficult to question their compliance, their reliability, and data security, cyber security. This is their core business, actually, at the end of the day. So we're focusing on SaaS, and the main driver for that, as I mentioned, is that this is managed by a trusted third party. That, of course, is also very relevant in pharma. We have to look at this in terms of compliance. How do we assess this? How do we verify this? I will come back to that point a little bit later. Now, there are also dedicated hosts, and here in this presentation, we're focusing most on Azure from Microsoft, but of course, the other large CSPs offer very similar comparable packages. There are dedicated GxP hosts for applications in pharma as well, which can be another option if you are, let's say, a little bit cloud reluctant, but also you want to have your own infrastructure managed, again, by a trusted third party who understands the GMP requirements. That this is also a good option to look at platform as a service if you're not completely comfortable to go to full software as a service. So just to compare a little bit, and I will put on some tick marks to say, from our perspective, we want to support all of the different modes. Now, of course, public cloud SaaS is where the lowest total cost of ownership is coming from. But there are also, right now, as the industry and as in general other industries move forward onto cloud, onto SaaS approaches, then there are other options possible and may be valid for you at the point of time of where you are as an organization and the type of systems that you're looking for. So as mentioned, today's CSPs, Azure, Alibaba, AWS, et cetera, these are global mega organizations who put this competence at their core, and that's what we're looking to leverage with a cloud EBR. Now, the difference between perpetual license and a subscription, this again, right now we have to offer some flexibility because, again, it's a little bit of a journey in terms of the comfort and expectation from our customers. So on-premise, private cloud, public cloud, all possible. We focus on SaaS public cloud as the lowest TCO, but we understand that some companies would like to have that either in-house or on a private cloud at this point of time. And we do make those options available. And I think that is an important approach for GXP cloud applications at this time. Now, what about single and multi-tenancy? So what that really means is how many organizations are supported on a particular infrastructure. So if we look at more of a typical approach, we have one public cloud environment. We have several companies, they still have data segregation. So of course there is, let's say this is a firewall between them. It's not possible to share information. It's a different company, different use case, different processes, master data, users, etc. But they are using the same public cloud infrastructure. And again, this is where the lowest TCO really lies. Now, what we've seen in our experience in recent customer engagements is that for some companies, they might want to have their own either public or private solution hosted, but they want to have several sites on that one infrastructure. So it's one company, several manufacturing sites on one application instance available in the cloud. Another one, again, which is quite interesting, which has come up now in the last years, is that for CMOs, they want to do something similar, but it could be within the same facility. They want to have this data segregation between different client processes. So it's not possible to share batch data, recipe information. So it is siloed, but again, running on one infrastructure. So these are interesting applications for multi-tenancy to lower the TCO. For smaller companies, then again, the public SaaS is bringing the lowest costs. That does require alignment to the product release over a number of companies. So in terms of a time frame when updates to the application will be made, this is one of the trade-offs, of course, with using a public SaaS. So how about compliance in GXP, CSV, CSA? So is it possible to validate a GXP SaaS solution? Well, clearly, yes. It's not the first time. We're not the first people to do this either. What we've seen in our experience is that this is easier if your application is focused on pharma, because the supplier understands the industry, understands the software development lifecycle, can speak your language, and also that you are using the large CSP providers, so such as Azure here. They're having more than 90 certifications for across ISO, etc., in terms of how they manage the service for us. This is something that's for small companies impossible to replicate. But that level of infrastructure robustness, technology, and service around data security, reliability, of course, it's world class, and this is what we're leveraging again, also from the compliance aspect. What we do is we have a specific app qualification lifecycle for each release, each change in the application. And on top of that, we provide a lean validation approach based on risk assessment with the customer, looking at their quality management system to propose what we recommend is the most appropriate way to validate a system which is already qualified and already running on a compliant infrastructure. So actually, and very quickly, and this is some of the work that we're doing with ISPE SIGs around Pharma 4.0, Validation 4.0. It's very useful to start with the process flows, which are anyway intrinsic part of electronic batch record system. So building on those process flows, assessing the risk, considering the software maturity, data integrity, life cycle, criticality, and vulnerability. It sounds like a lot of things to consider, but you can do this in quite a lean way. And there's a lot of value to do that in terms of making sure that you really focus validation activities in the right area. And certainly the latest guidance and information coming from the CSA group is also very helpful in terms of scaling test documentation and evidences based on risk. So just a reminder on the GAMP 5 principles, we're heavily involved with ISP, as I mentioned, and still the key fundamentals of GAMP are just as valid today. You do have to adopt it with new technologies and new approaches, but it's intended to be a guide that you can adopt. So leveraging the supplier activities is really what I mentioned here on the left side and the middle. Being part of the QMS SDLC, being scalable, being risk-based, focused on criticality. We're moving on our side into a fully electronic environment to be object-oriented in terms of requirement statements, specifications, test, let's say, plans and results. Next step will also be around test automation. So we as a provider also want to use latest approaches and technology to speed up and get this application out to more companies and bring new releases faster. And to do that, we have to use a modern software SDLC approach. So do we need to validate EBRs? Again, this is a very common question, and it's also true, of course, for cloud EBR. So yes, there are specific FDA statements, and this is one interesting paragraph around that, which came from a couple of years ago from US FDA. Data integrity and compliance with drug cGMP. And yeah, as it said, yes, clearly it's a cGMP workflow, and that it does require a verification. And so this is one of the starting points for that. Now, what we do is we, of course, as I mentioned, we qualify our application. There's a base validation for the platform itself. And then what we have to do is to look at, well, what are the client-specific use cases and processes that are modeled and used by within the application. Now, what we have, our approach is that we can simulate these processes and use the EBR itself to document that simulation and test. This is one approach. And I think that's a good example of, let's say, making these applications more widely available. We have to put some of the basic GMP requirements in as part of the application itself. I think really, if you're a pharma supplier, it's part of our duty to help and let's say improve the life and where we see efforts that are required to implement the system, if we can perform a functionality to speed that up and eliminate that time and service and cost, then this is some of the things that will speed up the adoption of the application, again, into also small and medium-sized companies. So yeah, building in functionality for specific compliance need is one example. And The next part of this presentation, I will talk about self-service. So cloud and SaaS EBR sounds like a technology problem or opportunity. What we've come to realize is that actually it is about the self-service model. That is more interesting. So putting an application onto the cloud, hosting it, making it lower cost, that is not a rocket science. It's being done now in lots of different industries, and there's a very tried and tested approach for this. Yes, we have to look at the compliance aspects. We have to understand the requirements for pharma. And what we are seeing now is that we have to put the services to deploy it in the client's hands. And this again is about how we can reduce the service, the cost and the time to implement such an application. And I will give you some examples of this in the next 5 minutes. Infrastructure, I won't spend too long on this today just because of time, but Alan touched on it as well. So we used to see, and we still see, very heavy implementations in manufacturing IT. Lots of point-to-point connections, very difficult to set up, test, and maintain. And typically you have a lot of dependency. So if one system or module comes out, then you have a lot of rework to be done. Message buses have been around now for a while, greatly simplify integration, and the CSPs. So we are leveraging on our side for integration. What is your offer, for example, in terms of the buses and the message queues that are standardized and make this much easier to plug in and plug out data to a cloud application. On the more of a traditional EBR use case side, so machine data, weighing scale integration, printing, again, there are specific IoT hubs and message types available. We're using MQTT as a protocol via IoT gateway to access information from level 2 systems and weighing terminals. And we found this to be, let's say, quite straightforward and easy to adopt also for on our client side to implement this technology. So the costs of this are very low. The complexity to set it up are fairly manageable, and there are a lot of benefits to leverage this approach to share and plug in other tools as you expand and grow, let's say, a manufacturing IT landscape. Just to show this example here is already in use for weighing dispensing use case. So requires very little amount of client-side infrastructure. So of course with cloud we remove the server component. Here we're focusing on very few devices and hardware to make this process work also for weighing, which is quite manual and involved with different peripherals and devices that need to be connected. Okay, so just to finish up with some use cases and some customer case studies here. So our first launch, this was in ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, first cloud EBR. And what I really liked about this company is that they were very clear from the beginning why they wanted to implement an EBR. So we need to reduce the time it takes to review batches. We just cannot release fast enough to meet our demand. And that really contained the main focus for what they did and how we deployed it. So a very small facility, a company I'm sure all of you have never heard of, but doing something very novel, very quick, and going to eliminate paper using tablets. What is nice about this image is that this is their own people training themselves how to implement EBR and how to use EBR. Again, this is really where we started this self-service approach. The benefits, the typical EBR benefits. So that's what they're looking for: data integrity, reduce the errors, increase the performance of batch release, as mentioned, and collect data that they didn't have easily available before, for example, for APR, when they're using paper records. A recent example, and I think this is from slightly outside the industry, but they are pharma, but this was in the cosmetics R&D area, and running a project in the middle of COVID and implementing this EBR in 2 weeks. So from start to finish, that they can actually use the application. They use it as a tool to manage their batches, to record their batches. And I think that is should be a significant inspiration for even large companies to understand what can be done. And if you simplify let's say, the requirements and then deliver it in a lean and agile manner. So this is our project team. And yeah, apologies for my missing the photo up there. I get a lot of fun from our team that my image does not look half as professional as any of those. The client vision was to really go paperless first in the R&D, which is done. Now we're in the production. And in time, they want to do some integration topics as well, and also analytics. So they have a vision which is very similar to, let's say, Industry 4 type principles. But also for a small cosmetics company in the region, that's quite interesting that they move forward and they invest and take action in this area. The timeline for the project, as I said, I think that is a key point I'd like to make here. So starting right in the middle of the COVID lockdown here in Southeast Asia, everything done remotely except for the first half a day, and really onboarding the customer how to use the application, supporting them in the first days to build their process, test their process, and start using it for batch production. And now the client R&D team are able to build and manage their own specifications and perform review by exception. So in a very, very short time, and yeah, made possible by SaaS, and also, yeah, of course, companies like Zoom, which have enabled our remote working. The last one I like to show, and I think this comes back to really, again, in this year, clear understanding of why we should deploy these systems faster and more widely available across the pharma industry. So a regional site for vaccine, and we looked at their pain points. We did a study, and we spent quite some time in the production and the laboratory around the business. There was around 115 pain points that we identified across the business. A lot of these they knew already, some of them were completely new. It was very helpful for us to capture this from a third perspective and help to prioritize these and link this back to their corporate digitization goal and roadmap. This was very quickly, how did we rank these? This was, we did this formally, we also did this informally with the management team. And you can see here that to transcribe manually across many processes and the lack of information and DI resulting from paper in production, that's really stuck out, not only in the detailed, let's say, assessment of these pain points, but also as a feeling in the company of what they needed to prioritize. If you look at this, this is not unusual, but it still stands out that 50% of the total cycle time and total effort was for review and approval activities. And so this is why we have to speed up, because as I said, the industry deserves solutions. And this time to release and to manage production process of critical products, we simply have to find a way to address that. And SaaS EBR can be a way to bring that to a wider audience, if you will. We need to get these sites on the road to digitization, very simply. Now we're underway with a pilot. So following this, again, our self-service approach, we're looking for really our client to drive this using the tool. And to verify this, of course, also in their GXP space, and we will have additional CSV services to deploy this, being an export-oriented facility. So again, post-COVID, there's a clear urgency to speed up the time to market. EBR is a proven tool for efficiency and quality. We now need to scale this. We need to deploy not only at the lighthouses, and we need to do this rapidly. So in summary, the models such as platform and subscription as a service, software as a service rather, will have to become the norm to scale out. SaaS is already proving to dramatically lower the costs and time to implement paper in GXP to get the core EBR benefits, which most of us know very well. Manufacturing right first time, review by exception, efficiency and compliancy through automation and going paperless, integrating data from other systems, and to get to, as a next step quickly to analytics from that data. SaaS is less about the technology and the deployment approach and payment model. It is now what we see is it's more around having a self-service tool, an implementation strategy that you can attack things in a couple of weeks and get something done. Use of cloud requires, of course, IT compliance and data security, and the existing guidances for CSV and the power and the focus of, let's say, the large cloud service providers are a very good starting point for pulling this together. So finally, we want to digitize all sites, not only the lighthouses. And today we realize ever more the importance of this. And finally, if it's on paper, it's not data. So we've been saying this a long time. And we believe it's actually now is, let's say, is a good point to think about this as a global message. For pharma, MES and pharma manufacturing IT professionals, this is something that we should really attack and focus on now. So thank you for the time. I think I've just got to 29 minutes, so probably not too much time for Q&A, but we are available online to receive your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. There's always time for Q&A, and we have two questions actually. One is from the chat. Would it be easy to start a private cloud, and when the industry or regulators are matured, migrate to a public cloud?
To start a private cloud, yes, it's very easy. So if you go to Azure, you go to AWS, you go to other providers, they have options for this. You can start up very rapidly. As I mentioned, we have the option to deploy in a private or even on-premise, but we would recommend cloud. And yeah, so it's quite straightforward to do that. Can be done also remotely. The second part of the question, I didn't fully follow. Do the regulators allow public cloud? There is no statement in GMP to say you cannot. And so I'd need to understand a bit more that question, actually. But the person who sent that, by all means, could reach out to us and we could take a bit more time with them. Hello, Sabrina? I think I've lost you.
The person who actually asked that question in the chat, this is a perfect opportunity to schedule a private meeting with David and his colleagues. Maybe just find them on the conference platform and check out their availability. Then we can gather more details on that for you. All right. Question number 2 is, one of the main reasons why we did not implement MES or EBR in the cloud yet is the higher network latency between the site and the cloud server. This is a problem for MES, DCS, PLC, real-time communication in the network if the network response is larger than 20 to 40 milliseconds. Mm-hmm. What is your experience with this and how to mitigate?
As mentioned, for integration, we're doing first projects now, and we're using, for example, MQTT and with a local IoT gateway, and we found this to be very robust. Also for information coming from a weighing scale, which is changing very, very quickly, and generally, we have not seen a performance or reliability issue using our public SaaS on Azure, and I'm sure that's the case with AWS. So we haven't seen that personally. I think it's a technical problem. Technical solutions will exist, and yeah, I would look to the IoT type concepts for integration because they are built for this two-cloud direct connectivity model, and we've found them to be very robust.
Okay, very good. I'm just checking if there's any other questions coming up. Doesn't look like it for the moment. So I would like to thank you, David. It's been a pleasure working with you again. And like I said, the person already responded who asked that question. They will reach out for you. So you have a good conversation later then with them to clarify the details on that.
You have a good conference, everybody.
Thank you very much. And our next presenter is already online. We will be hearing Özgür Ulutaş, who is a director at Noble Ilak in Turkey. And her presentation is called Incorporating People into Processes, the Human Factor